So in unit 5, let us see about fuels and combustion. So what are fuels? Fuel is a combustible substance which contains carbon as a main constituent, which on burning gives large amount of heat. So when we see the combustion process, carbon oxidizes to get carbon dioxide. Similarly, when hydrogen is present in the fuel, it becomes water vapor. So the main source of fuel is coal and crude petroleum oil. These are stored fuels available in the earth crust and are generally called as fossil fuels. Why they are called as fossil fuels? Because they were formed from the fossilized remains of plants and animals. Let us see the characteristics or requirements of a good fuel. A fuel should be cheap and readily available. It should be safe and economical for storage and transport. It should not undergo spontaneous combustion. It should have higher calorific value. It should have moderate ignition temperature. The combustion should be easily controllable. It should have low moisture content because the moisture content reduces the calorific value. The products of combustion should not be harmful. It should have low non-combustible matter or in ash content. Let us see the classification of fuels. Based on occurrence, fuels are classified into two types. Primary fuels, which is occurring in nature as such, example coal, petroleum, natural gas. The second category is secondary fuels. It is derived from the primary fuels, example coke, gasoline and coal gas. Based on the physical state, both primary and secondary fuels may be further subclassified into three types, which is solid fuels, liquid fuels and gaseous fuels. When we see the example, coal and coke are considered as solid fuels. Similarly, gasoline, which is petrol, and diesel are liquid fuels. Similarly, coal gas and natural gas are coming under gaseous fuels. So this is the chart showing the summary of fuels. So the fuels are classified as primary or natural fuels and secondary or artificial fuels. Primary fuels are further subclassified as solid fuels, liquid fuels and gaseous fuels. Similarly, secondary fuels are also subclassified as solid fuel, liquid fuels and gaseous fuels. The examples of these fuels are given in the table. When we compare the solid, liquid and gaseous fuels based on the calorific value, the solid fuels, due to so much ash and moisture content, the calorific value gets lowered. Similarly, in liquid fuels, the calorific value is higher than the solid fuels. So the gaseous fuels has the highest calorific value than solid and liquid fuels. So when we see the combustion, it is lower in solid fuels and it is quick in liquid fuels, whereas it is rapid in gaseous fuels. When we see the control of combustion, it cannot be controlled easily, whereas in liquid fuels, it can be controlled when required. Similarly, in gaseous fuels, it can be controlled by controlling air supply. When we see the air requirements among the fuels, in solid fuels, it burns in large excess of air, whereas liquid fuels, it burns in slight excess of air, whereas gaseous fuels, it also burns in slight excess of air. When we see the thermal efficiency, it is least in solid fuels and higher in liquid fuels and highest in gaseous fuels. In internal combustion engine, the solid fuels cannot be used in IC engines, whereas liquid fuels can be used in IC engine, and gaseous fuels it also can be used in IC engines. When we see the handling cost, it is more for solid fuels, it is less for liquid fuels and lesser for gaseous fuels. When we see the ignition temperature, it is highest for solid fuels and it is moderate for liquid fuels and it is very low for gaseous fuels. When we see the cost of production, so it has low cost of production in solid fuels, it is high for liquid fuels and also it is high for gaseous fuels. When we see the pollution, so there is much release of smoke, dust and soot particles in solid fuels, whereas in liquid fuels it is a clean and free from dust and soot particles. So similarly, gaseous fuels also, it is a clean and no smoke or dust particles emitted. So fire hazard, So it is of least risk when we consider the solid fuels. So liquid fuels which are under greater risk, whereas gaseous fuels which are highly inflammable and are at greater risk.